The smell of pine and sharp cold filled the sanctuary, biting at my nose and settling deep into my lungs. Winter had wrapped our packlands in ice and snow, harsher than anyone remembered, forcing us all into the main hall like trapped animals. Bodies pressed close, voices overlapped. Tension hummed under every breath. I pulled my worn sweater tighter around myself and kept my head low as I slipped through the crowd. As an Omega, I had learned this skill early: how to move quietly, how to take up less space, how to become invisible. It was safer that way. My light blonde hair, impossible to hide completely, was tucked under a knitted cap. My grandmother had made it for me before she died, weaving a few strands of her silver hair into the yarn. "When you wear this," she had whispered, her hands warm and steady, "you carry my protection." I clung to that thought now, my heart thudded too fast, my palms were damp, the hall felt too small. "Make way for the Alpha King." The command cracked through the noise like a whip. The crowd split apart instantly. I flattened myself against the rough wooden wall, lowering my head as Alpha Darius strode in. He didn't rush. He never had to. His presence alone bent the room around him. His shoulders filled his dark fur cloak, and his heavy boots struck the floor with purpose. His beard framed a hard jaw, one that never softened, not even in stories. At his sides walked his beta commanders, alert and watchful. Behind them came a child. He was small, maybe 7 or 8, moving as if every step was a fight. His face was twisted into a scowl that looked practiced, learned, but his eyes betrayed him. They were wild, afraid, angry. The Alpha King's son, Prince Leo, everyone knew the stories. His mother, the former Luna, had vanished 3 years ago, leaving nothing behind but silence. Since then, the boy had become a storm no woman could survive. Female attendants came and went, chased off by screaming fits, biting words, and flying objects. He hated women, or maybe he feared them. Either way, no one could reach him. Alpha Darius began to speak, his voice deep and steady, filling every corner of the hall. "Winter has tested us. The eastern border has reported 3 rogue incursions this month alone. I should have listened. Pack assemblies were not optional." But my attention stayed locked on the boy. He tugged at his stiff jacket like it was choking him. His breathing was uneven. Panic rolled off him in waves so strong I could almost taste it. Then suddenly he looked up, our eyes met. The world seemed to pause. There was no warmth in his gaze, no comfort, just a sharp, sudden awareness as he saw me, truly saw me in a way no one else ever did. His eyes widened for half a second, then narrowed. His lips pulled back, small teeth flashing. A snarl, my breath caught. I dropped my gaze instantly, shame and fear flooding me at once. What had I been thinking? Omegas never made eye contact with the Alpha's family. Never. My grandmother's voice echoed in my head, calm and firm, eyes down, spirit up. "And so," Alpha Darius continued, "we ask for volunteers for winter patrol. Those with healing abilities are especially needed at the border outposts." My fingers moved on their own, brushing the small pouch of dried herbs hidden in my pocket. Healing was all I had. The only thing that ever made me useful. My grandmother had taught me plants, poultices, pain, how to ease it, how to feel it, how to sit with it. "I volunteer." The words escaped before I could stop them. They didn't sound like they came from me. The hall stirred, whispers spread. Faces turned, searching. Alpha Darius's gaze found me, heavy, unreadable. "Step forward, Omega." My legs felt weak as I moved through the opening crowd. Every step felt exposed, like walking into open snow with no shelter in sight. I stopped before him, head bowed, fingers clenched in my sleeves. The cap on my head felt heavier now, but steadier too. "Your name?" he asked. His voice was quieter up close, but no less powerful. "Isla Alpha," I said. I lifted my eyes for a heartbeat, then lowered them again. "I'm trained in herbal medicine, wounds, illness. An Omega healer." His expression didn't change. "You understand the risk. Rogues show no mercy." I opened my mouth to answer, something slammed into my legs. I gasped as small fists struck my thighs again and again. A snarl ripped through the hall, high and raw. "No," the boy screamed, "no more women." Prince Leo clung to me like a wild thing, shaking with rage and terror, his cries echoing off the stone walls as every eye in the room snapped toward us. They filed out one by one, leaving behind lies and half-truths. When the doors shut, the great hall sank into a heavy silence. It felt like the entire pack had stopped breathing. Everyone knew the rule: no one touched the Alpha's son, not without permission, not ever. I didn't think so, I just moved. I lowered myself to one knee so I was face to face with the boy. I didn't grab his wrists when he lashed out, and I didn't try to calm him with soft lies. I stayed where I was, solid and quiet, letting his anger crash around me like a storm. I became the ground beneath his feet. "I hate you," he shouted, his small body shaking, his chest rising fast. "I hate all of you." "I know," I said, the calm in my voice surprised even me. "That's all right." He froze, his hand stopped mid-swing. He stared at me as I'd spoken in a foreign tongue. He'd expected fear, or tears, or yelling back. That was how the women of the pack usually reacted to him. Instead, I accepted his hatred, and it threw him off balance. You smell like pine trees, he accused suddenly as if I'd offended him on purpose. I nodded. I collect pine resin for medicine, it sticks to you after a while. He sniffed again, slower this time, more careful. I watched his shoulders loosen just a fraction. The change was small, but I saw it. I also knew how fragile the moment was. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and his rage would return, or worse, the Alpha's wrath would fall on me for daring to kneel before his son, Leo. Alpha Darius's voice sliced through the tension like a blade. Come back to my side. The boy hesitated, his eyes stayed on mine, searching. In that pause, I saw what lived beneath the anger, a lonely child whose mother had left, whose father ruled from a distance, whose world had been shaped by loss. I recognized that emptiness. It had been my shadow since the day my parents were killed in a border fight when I was barely older than Leo was now. It's okay to be angry, I whispered, so softly only he could hear, but you can't live inside it forever, it gets too heavy. Something flickered in his eyes, not understanding, not yet, but curiosity, maybe even hope. Then he turned and walked back to his father. His usual stomping steps were gone, replaced by something slower, thoughtful. Alpha Darius studied me for a long moment. His gaze made my skin prickle. You will report to Beta Commander Thorn, he said at last. Border duty, you leave at first light. I bowed my head, relief rushed through me, I hadn't been punished. As I straightened, I noticed another man standing just behind the Alpha, his advisor. The symbols on his robes marked him as powerful and dangerous. He watched me with sharp interest like I was a puzzle he intended to solve. Cold crawled down my spine. The meeting is over, Alpha Darius announced. The hall filled with noise again, voices buzzing like angry insects. I turned to leave, already thinking about supplies and the long road ahead. Wait, the single word cut through the crowd. Prince Leo had slipped away from his father again. He stood a few steps from me. The hall went silent once more. You're not scared of me, he said. It wasn't really a question, more of a challenge. I chose my words carefully. Too many ears were listening. I'm afraid of many things, Your Highness, I said, but not angry pups. Gasps echoed around us. Even the Alpha looked surprised. But Leo's mouth twitched, not a smile, not quite, but closer than anyone had seen in years. You'll come back, he said, then softer, rower, you won't leave as she did. My heart cracked. Border duty killed Omegas every year, promises like that were dangerous. Still, when I looked into his eyes, I nodded. I'll come back, I said. The words felt carved into my bones. He stared at me for a long moment, then turned away, his back straight, his shoulders tight. When the hall finally emptied, the weight of what I'd done settled over me. In just a few minutes, my fate had tangled with the Alpha's son. By the time I reached my small cabin at the edge of Pack Land, the snow was falling thick and fast. It swallowed my footprints as soon as I made them. The forest groaned under winter's weight, branches creaking like old bones. And standing there, surrounded by cold and silence, I had never felt more alone. What was I thinking? Signing up for Border Patrol was already asking for trouble, but catching the eye of the royal family, that could get someone like me killed. My fingers slid to the small pouch tied at my waist, pressing against the familiar lumps of dried herbs inside. The touch steadied me. In my mind, my grandmother's voice drifted in like a soft breath on the wind. The most damaged souls often need healing the most, she used to say, and sometimes when you heal another, you mend yourself too. I stopped at my cabin door and glanced back toward the Pack compound. Distant lights glimmered through the dark like watchful eyes. Somewhere in that maze of stone and timber, there was a young boy with fury burning behind his stare and pain buried deep in his chest. A boy who had met my gaze without fear, a boy who hadn't scared me away. The road ahead was dangerous, unclear, heavy with risk, and yet something stirred inside me, something small, fragile hope. Morning came slowly, as if even the sun hesitated to rise over the Packlands. Thin gray light struggled through thick clouds swollen with snow. I hadn't really slept. Most of the night had passed in quiet preparation, sorting what little I owned and bundling herbs that might save a life at the border outpost. My hands worked on their own, guided by memory more than thought. Arnica for bruised flesh, willow bark to dull pain, yarrow for wounds that refused to close. Each bundle was tied carefully, almost reverently. These weren't just plants, they were promises. My grandmother had taught me that long ago. Healing wasn't only about what a plant could do, it was about the care poured into it. Your hands remember what your mind forgets, she would say as she showed me how to crush leaves, steep roots, and bind cloth tight enough to protect but not harm. A hard knock shattered the quiet. I jumped. The sky outside was barely pale. It was far too early for my border escort. Heart pounding, I wiped my hands on my worn trousers and moved to the door. When I pulled it open, cold air rushed in, and with it Beta Commander Thorn. Snow clung to his broad shoulders. His face was carved from ice, unreadable and unforgiving. Behind him, half hidden in the dim morning light, stood 3 Pack warriors. Their breath rose in thick white clouds. Omega Allah, Thorn said. My rank came before my name, as it always did. There's been a change. My stomach tightened. Has the alpha changed his mind? Was this punishment for speaking to Prince Leo? You're needed at the pack house, Thorn continued flatly. The alpha commands your presence. Relief hit first, then fear rushed in right behind it. Not punishment, at least not yet, but being summoned to the heart of the pack was no comfort. Now, I asked, glancing back at my half-packed supplies. Now, he said, no room for debate. Bring your healing tools. That stopped me. Is someone hurt? Something flickered across his face, brief, sharp, concern, irritation. Prince Leo is unwell, he said. The alpha believes your methods may help. Understanding settled in my chest, heavy and cold. Something had gone wrong after our meeting. I didn't waste another second. I grabbed my most useful remedies, slung them into a leather satchel, and wrapped my grandmother's old shawl around my shoulders beneath my thin coat. Then I stepped into the cold. We walked in silence through the sleeping settlement, shadows moving like ghosts through untouched snow. The world felt hushed, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Somewhere far off, a wolf howled, long and lonely. The sound pulled at me. My own wolf stirred inside, soft and submissive, answering with a quiet whine only I could feel. The pack house loomed ahead, massive and ancient. Stone and timber layered by generations of alphas until it looked more like a fortress than a home. Warm light glowed from scattered windows, sharp against the blue-gray dawn. We didn't enter through the front. Instead, we were guided through side doors and narrow servant corridors. A reminder, even summoned, I was still just an omega. Inside, the heat wrapped around me too fast, almost stifling after the cold outside. The air was thick with the smell of burning wood, pine resin, and something stronger, alpha presence. Dominant, heavy. It pressed down on my instincts, urging my head to bow, my body to shrink. I felt myself start to fold in on instinct. Then my grandmother's voice rose again in my memory. Stand tall, little one. Being an omega doesn't mean being invisible. I straightened my back. We stopped before a large wooden door guarded by two silent warriors. Thorn gave a short nod. One of them opened the door without a word. Prince Leo's chambers lay beyond, and they were destroyed. Furniture was overturned as if thrown in rage. Bedding was shredded and scattered across the floor. The room looked less like a bedroom and more like the aftermath of a storm, wild, violent, and deeply broken. My breath caught. Whatever was happening to the prince, it was far worse than I had imagined. The air inside the room was thick with fear and anger, so strong it stung my nose and made my eyes burn. At the center of it all stood Alpha Darius, arms folded tight across his chest, his tall frame rigid as stone. His gaze was fixed on the small figure shaking in the corner. Prince Leo was crouched low against the wall, trapped between boy and beast. Patches of dark fur crawled over his arms and jaw, his fingers tipped with claws that scraped softly against the floor. His teeth were too sharp, his eyes glowing amber as a deep growl rolled nonstop from his chest, a sound full of terror, not threat. She's here, Thorn announced, nudging me forward just enough to remind me I had no choice. The alpha turned to face me. His expression was controlled, but up close I could see the cracks, dark shadows under his eyes, tension carved into his face by sleepless nights and impossible responsibility. A king to his pack, a father to a suffering child. Omega, he said, my son has been unreachable since the assembly. He won't sleep, he won't eat. This half-shift has lasted hours, it's dangerous. I nodded. I knew the risk all too well. When young shifters lost control during strong emotions, they could become trapped between forms, bodies twisted. My mind was broken, some never recovered. May I approach him, Alpha? I asked quietly. Darius stepped aside, permission and a test. Others watched from the edges of the room, a pale attendant wringing her hands, another beta standing stiff with doubt, and the Alpha's advisor, his sharp eyes measuring my every move. I placed my bag on the floor and walked slowly toward Leo, careful with each step. His growl grew louder as I came closer, his small body curling tighter into itself like a cornered animal. Hello again, Prince Leo, I said gently, stopping several steps away. Looks like today is harder than yesterday. Go away, he snapped, the words rough and broken by his changing mouth. I can't, I said calmly. Your father asked for my help and I told you I'd come back. I won't break my word. His growl wavered. Confusion flickered in his glowing eyes. I lowered myself to the floor and sat cross-legged, making myself small, harmless. My grandmother used to say being stuck between forms feels awful, I continued, like we were having an ordinary conversation. Like wearing clothes that don't fit anywhere, too tight, too loose. Never right? Leo stared at me, wary but listening. Did you know wolves have 2 layers of fur? I went on. A soft one underneath and a rough one on top. That's why it burns and itches when it starts coming in. The growling stopped. His breathing stayed fast, but the sound of rage faded into something closer to fear. I'm going to reach into my bag now, I warned softly. Nothing scary, just pine oil, it helps with the itching. I moved slowly, every motion careful. When I uncorked the vial, the sharp, clean scent of pine spread through the room like fresh forest air after snow. Leo's nose twitched. You smell like trees, he muttered, his voice more boy than wolf. I smiled gently. I know, the forest makes me feel safe. I paused, then asked, where do you feel safe, Prince Leo? The question caught him off guard, his brow creased. For a moment, some of the fur on his face faded. Nowhere, he said at last. The word hit hard, too heavy for someone so small. My chest tightened. I understand, I said softly. When my parents died, I felt the same way, like the world had no safe place left. Leo's shoulders dropped just a little. Your parents died? He asked. I nodded. I was 9. There was a fight over territory. They were protecting the borders, he said suddenly, panic flaring in his voice. The fur on his arms bristled again. Yes, I said honestly, just like you'll help protect them someday, but I'm very good at staying alive, and I promised I'd come back, remember? His eyes narrowed. She promised too, he said bitterly. I didn't need to ask who he meant. I'm not her, I said simply. I only speak for myself, and I don't promise unless I mean it. He studied me for a long moment. Slowly, almost like he didn't notice it himself, the fur retreated. His claws softened, his teeth dulled, the glow in his eyes dimmed to human gold. Can I show you something? I asked, reaching for my bag once more. After a long pause, he gave a small nod. Curiosity had finally won over fear. I slipped my hand into my pocket and pulled out the small wooden wolf. Years of touching had smoothed its edges until it fit perfectly in my palm. My grandmother carved it for me after my parents died. She said that whenever fear crept in or loneliness got too heavy, I should hold it and remember one thing: wolves are never truly alone. They carry their pack inside them. Leo's gaze locked onto the carving. He didn't speak. His face stayed still, but something in his eyes shifted, like a storm pausing before it breaks. After a short hesitation, I extended my hand toward him. Do you want to hold it? His hand was human now, small, careful, unsure. He reached out slowly, as if the wolf might disappear if he moved too fast. The moment his fingers wrapped around it, his shoulders dropped, just a little, enough to notice, enough to matter. It's warm, he said, surprised. Wood keeps the heat of the hands that touch it, I told him softly. My grandmother used to say that's why wooden things sometimes feel alive. He turned the carving over, tracing the simple lines with his thumb. Did it help you when you were scared? Yes, I said honestly, not because it's special, but because it reminded me that someone loved me enough to make it, that I wasn't alone. He looked up at me then, really looked. And in his eyes, fragile and uncertain, I saw the first thin thread of trust beginning to form. Can I keep it until you come back? He asked. The words hit harder than I expected. That wolf was one of the last pieces of my grandmother I had left. It stayed with me through cold nights, grief, and fear. But when I looked at Leo, this small boy hiding his hurt behind anger and silence, I knew I couldn't say no. Yes, I said quietly. Until I come back. A throat cleared behind us. I turned to see Alpha Darius standing there, watching everything with an expression I couldn't read. I had forgotten we weren't alone. The boy seems calmer, the older advisor noted, his sharp eyes flicking between Leo and me. Perhaps the Omega's assignment at the border can wait. Alpha Darius thought for a moment. No, he said at last. We need healers at the outposts, she offered freely. His gaze shifted to me, heavy and final. You will leave as planned. But you will return in 1 week to check on my son. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order spoken with full alpha authority. I bowed my head even as unease coiled in my chest. Traveling weekly between the border and the pack house was dangerous, especially alone, especially for an Omega. Father, Leo's voice cut through the tension, small, steady. I want her to teach me about plants when she comes back. The alpha's brows lifted in surprise. His son hadn't shown interest in learning anything in years. We will discuss it, he said carefully. Leo's fingers tightened around the wooden wolf. She promised to come back. Something passed over Alpha Darius's face. Pain, recognition, maybe both. Yes, he said quietly, she did. I stood, sensing that the moment had ended and my presence was no longer needed. With your permission, Alpha, I should prepare to leave. He nodded. Commander Thorne will escort you to the border patrol. Be ready within the hour. As I gathered my things, Leo suddenly crossed the room and pressed something into my hand. I looked down to see a small silver button, likely torn from one of his ceremonial jackets during his earlier rage. So you remember to come back, he said fiercely, daring me to refuse. I closed my fingers around it, feeling its cool weight. I won't forget, I promised. As Thorne led me away, I glanced back. Leo stood alone in the wreckage of his room, clutching the wooden wolf like it was the only solid thing left in the world. In that moment, stripped of titles and tantrums, he looked exactly like what he was, a wounded child aching to belong. Outside, snow began to fall again. Thick flakes melted against my skin like tears. The silver button rested in my palm, solid and real. A promise I wasn't sure I could keep, but one I wanted to honor with everything I had. Ahead of me, the border waited, cold, dangerous, unforgiving. But the thought of a small boy counting the days until my return made the journey feel less like an ending, and more like the start of something I couldn't yet name. The border outpost came into view, a cluster of wooden buildings pressed against the mountainside, huddled together like frightened children bracing against the storm. After 3 brutal days pushing through forests buried under snow, the thin lines of smoke curling from stone chimneys should have felt like relief. Instead, as we drew closer, my skin prickled with the sense of being watched. Eyes followed me from behind walls and windows, silent, measuring, judging. "Home, sweet home," Thorn muttered beside me, his breath turning white in the freezing air. He had barely spoken during the journey, and when he did, it was clipped and cold. Escorting an Omega was clearly an inconvenience he resented. Every step made that obvious. The outpost gate, thick wood reinforced with iron, groaned as it swung open. A worn Beta guard gave Thorn a respectful nod, then looked straight at me. His face flickered between curiosity and dismissal. "This is the healer?" he asked, not even pretending to speak to me. "Omega," Thorn said flatly, "Alpha's orders." Something in his tone made my head snap toward him. That wasn't just confirmation, it was a warning. I had believed I was here because I volunteered. The sharp exchange between the men told me there was more to it than that. Inside the compound, the cold didn't slow anyone down. Warriors wrapped in thick winter furs moved between buildings with practiced purpose. Some carried weapons, others hauled crates of supplies. The air was heavy with the scent of alphas and betas, strong and dominant. My Omega instincts stirred uneasily. I didn't belong here. I might be the only Omega in the entire outpost. "The healing hut," Thorn said, pointing to a small building set apart from the rest. "You'll work there, you'll sleep there too." I nodded, shifting the strap of my bag where it bit into my shoulder. My body ached from the journey. My stomach was tight with hunger, but I kept my mouth shut. Omegas didn't complain. We accepted what we were given and said thank you. "There are 3 wounded," Thorn added, already turning away. "Border Patrol ran into rogues 2 days ago, nothing fatal, but infections starting." "Wait," the word came out sharper than I meant it to. Thorn stopped and looked back, brows lifting in surprise. "I need details," I said, steadying my voice. "How many rogues? What kind of attacks? Any deaths?" He studied me for a long moment like he was reevaluating something he thought he already understood. 5 rogues spotted this week, 3 engaged, mostly claw wounds, 1 bite to the shoulder. "No losses on our side." He paused, then added coldly, 2 rogues won't be a problem again." I nodded, already sorting through what I'd need in my head. "And what aren't you telling me?" I asked quietly. "Why am I really here?" His expression hardened. "You're here because you volunteered and because the Alpha commanded it." But his eyes slid away just enough to confirm my suspicion. Pieces were missing, important ones. "Report to Captain Nolan once the wounded are stable," he said, ending the conversation as he walked toward the command building. I stood alone for a moment, breathing in the sharp, icy air. Then I squared my shoulders and approached the healing hut. The smell hit me before I opened the door. Blood, infection, fear, metallic and sour, clinging to the back of my throat. Inside, 3 men lay on narrow cots. Pain was etched deep into their faces. 2 were awake, watching me with tired, guarded eyes. The third, a young beta, thrashed weakly in fevered sleep. His shoulder was bare, the wound angry and swollen. "You the healer?" One of the conscious men asked. His scent marked him as an alpha. He pushed himself up, then hissed as pain shot through him. "I am," I said, setting my bag down and washing my hands in the basin. The water was icy, biting into my skin. I welcomed it. The cold cleared my head. "I need to examine all of you." "They said they were sending a real healer," the alpha muttered, his gaze sweeping over my smaller frame, my Omega scent unmistakable. I met his eyes without flinching. "I assure you I'm very real." The second conscious patient, an older beta with gray threaded through his hair, let out a rough laugh. "She's got a bite, Rafe. Give her a minute before you start whining." I moved straight to the feverish beta. He needed me most. The bite on his shoulder had been cleaned badly and wrapped worse. Infection had already taken hold. The skin was red, swollen, and hot beneath my fingers. He groaned when I touched it. "How long has he been like this?" I asked, reaching for my supplies. "Since last night," the older beta said. "Devon's only been on patrol 2 months. I swallowed, steadying myself. Fear pressed in, danger lingered in the air, but so did my purpose. I was exactly where I needed to be, even if no one else believed it yet. The first wound was bad. I gave a short nod and opened my pack, laying out dried herbs, fresh bandages, and the small bottles of tinctures I'd prepared before the journey. "I need hot water and clean clothes," I said, already focused on my hands. "And someone has to hold him still. This will hurt." I expected resistance. I got none. To my surprise, both men who were still on their feet moved at once. Alpha Rafe, despite the doubt he'd shown earlier, limped over to the small iron stove and set water to heat. The older beta stepped in beside Devon, bracing himself to help restrain him when the pain became too much. I worked with steady hands. First, I crushed yarrow, garlic, and pine resin together, forming a thick paste meant to pull the infection out. Then I prepared a bitter tea from willow bark and egonia to fight the fever burning through him. As I worked, I spoke softly to Devon, explaining every step even though his eyes were glazed and unfocused. The fever had taken him far away, but I spoke anyway. It helped me stay calm. Maybe it helped him too. "You've done this before," the older beta said quietly as I cleaned the wound. "Where did you learn?" "My grandmother," I answered, not lifting my gaze. That was all he needed to know. The less these warriors learned about me, the safer I remained. Personal stories built trust. Trust built bonds, and bonds created weakness. I'd learned that lesson the hard way. The thought of Prince Leo struck me without warning, sharp and unwanted. My chest tightened. Was he still carrying the small wooden wolf I'd given him? Had his anger cooled, or was he still raging at the world? And why did the answers matter so much to me? "Thinking of home?" the beta asked, too sharp, too observant. I shook my head and leaned closer to Devon, forcing my thoughts back where they belonged: infection. "Fever, blood loss, hold him," I said firmly. As I cleaned the deepest part of the wound, Devon cried out, his body jerking in instinctive panic. Strong hands locked him in place while I worked through the pain with practiced speed. I could feel their eyes on me, watching, measuring, reassessing. By the time I finished, all 3 injured men had been treated. Rafe's ribs were wrapped tight where claws had torn through skin. The older beta, Morris, I learned, had a splinted wrist and cleaned cuts. Devon lay quieter now, sweat-soaked but breathing more evenly. Outside, the pale winter light was already fading. My back ached from bending for hours, and hunger twisted sharply in my stomach. "You should eat," Morris said as I washed my hands again. "Kitchen hut, red door." "Tell them I sent you." I nodded, grateful. "I'll check Devon again before sleeping, keep giving him the tea when he wakes, even a few sips." When I stepped outside, the cold hit me hard. Night had dragged the temperature down fast. The air felt brittle, biting deep with every breath. Above, stars pricked through the darkness, bright, sharp, and cold as ice. The kitchen hut was warm and filled with rich smells. Some kind of stew bubbled over the fire. Conversations paused as I entered. Curious eyes followed me, my pale hair, my slim frame, the omega scent I couldn't hide no matter how hard I tried. I kept my head down and moved toward the pot. "Are you the new healer?" A broad-shouldered woman with a tight braid and a strong beta scent studied me openly. "Yes," I said. "Morris sent me." She nodded and filled a wooden bowl until it was heavy in my hands. "Sit anywhere, eat while it's hot." I took a seat at the far end of a long table, away from the louder clusters of warriors. The stew was simple: venison, root vegetables, wild barley, but after days of dried food, it tasted incredible. Comfort spreads through me with every bite. I was halfway done when a shadow fell across the table. I looked up and froze. The alpha standing there was tall and solid, his presence filling the space without effort. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, sharp and unmistakable. His uniform marked him as Captain Nolan, the outpost commander Thorne had warned me about. "Omega Arara," he said. My name wasn't a greeting, it was a statement. "When you're finished," he continued, "walk with me." It wasn't a request. I swallowed and nodded, my appetite vanishing in an instant. Once he turned away, I forced myself to finish the stew quickly. Whatever comes next, I'd need strength. Outside, Nolan waited, his breath clouded in the freezing air. Without a word, he started walking toward the perimeter fence, fully expecting me to follow. The compound had grown quiet. Most of the pack had retreated indoors, leaving the night to settle over the mountains. "You treated the wounded," Nolan said when we reached the fence overlooking the dark forest. "Yes," I replied. "Devon's infection worries me, but if the herbs work, his fever should break by morning." Nolan nodded, eyes fixed on the black line of trees beyond the fence. "Good, we need every fighter ready." I stayed silent. This wasn't just a check-in. I could feel it, whatever he really wanted to say hadn't come yet. "What did Alpha Darius tell you about why you were sent here?" the captain asked at last. He turned fully toward me, his gaze steady, measuring. I answered with care. That healers were needed at the border posts, that rogue sightings had increased. His face didn't change, calm, controlled, but his scent did. It shifted, tightened like a blade being drawn halfway from its sheath. My omega instincts caught the note of unease immediately. "What didn't he tell you, Captain?" I asked softly, repeating the question I'd already posed to Thorne earlier. Nolan's lips pressed into a thin line. "These rogues aren't acting on instinct, they're organized, they move together, they strike where we're weakest." A cold shiver slid through me, sharp and unwelcome. It had nothing to do with the night air. "You think someone inside the pack is helping them," I said. "I don't think," he replied grimly. "I know, I just don't know who." The truth settled in my chest like a stone, and suddenly my presence here made sense. I wasn't part of the border patrols, I wasn't tied to the warriors, I had no history with this outpost, an outsider, an Omega. Nolan dipped his head slightly, confirming what I'd already realized. The Alpha believes you'll notice things others overlook, you see what fades into the background. So he wants me to spy on his own warriors, I said, keeping my voice flat. He wants you to protect this pack, Nolan corrected, his tone hardening, including his son. The words hit deeper than I expected. If the borders fell, the rogues wouldn't stop here. They'd tear through the land until they reached the heart of our territory. Prince Leo's face rose in my mind, small, guarded, hiding pain behind sharp defiance. My fingers curled instinctively around the silver button in my pocket, his promise, his demand that I return. Why choose me? I asked, though the answer was already clear. Why not send a trusted warrior undercover? Because no one watches an Omega, Nolan said bluntly. Warriors speak freely around you, they assume you're thinking only of herbs and wounds, you move through the outpost without drawing notice. It wasn't kind, it wasn't cruel, it was true. My invisibility, the thing that had shaped my life inside the pack, had finally become useful. What am I supposed to look for? I asked, accepting the task without saying it aloud. Strange behavior, too much interest in patrol routes, anyone leaving alone, especially after dark, any contact with outsiders. His stare locked onto mine. You report only to me, only when we're alone. I nodded, the weight of the secret pressed down on me, settling alongside my healing duties like an added burden I couldn't put down. When I mentioned I would be returning to the pack house, surprise crossed his face. You're going back? Alpha's orders, I said. In 5 days, understanding flickered in his eyes. The prince, he said quietly. Word of his behavior has reached even this far. They say he's been difficult since his mother left. He's hurting, I replied, unwilling to say more. Nolan studied me with renewed interest. You've formed a bond with the Alpha's son. It wasn't a question, still I answered. He doesn't trust easily. With good reason, Nolan muttered, his tone heavy with things left unsaid. Then he straightened. Your return serves another purpose. Report what you've seen before you leave. With that, he turned away, clearly finished, but one question burned too fiercely to ignore. Captain, he stopped and looked back over his shoulder. What happens to the traitor when you find them? His expression hardened into something unforgiving. Alpha justice, 2 words, final, absolute. Alone by the fence, I stared into the dark forest beyond the outpost. Somewhere among the warriors I'd met today stood a betrayer, someone willing to destroy their own pack. Why would they do it? Gold, revenge, love, every reason was dangerous. The silver button in my pocket felt heavier than before. I pulled it out, tracing its cool edge with my thumb. Leo's voice echoed in my mind, sharp, desperate. So you remember to come back? I had promised a wounded child I would return. And I had accepted a mission that might make that promise impossible to keep. If I exposed the traitor, would they silence an Omega who knew too much? If I failed, would the Alpha blame me when the next attack came? The night wind rose, carrying a single howl from deep within the forest. Not packed, not kin, something wild, something waiting. The sound echoed inside me, deep and familiar. I had always lived on the edges of the pack, an orphaned Omega watching from the outside. Now that same distance had dragged me straight into the center of danger and packed secrets. I closed my hand around Leo's silver button, its edges biting into my palm. Whatever came next, I would face it the way I always had, quietly, steadily. I would watch, I would heal. And somehow, no matter the cost, I would return to the pack house where a small boy with wounded trust and a wooden wolf was waiting. I turned back toward the healing hut to check on Devon's fever. As I walked, snow began to fall, soft, slow flakes drifting down like unspoken truths. The outpost had settled into the night. Warriors disappeared into barracks and guard towers, fires dimmed. Only the wind and the crunch of snow broke the silence, then I saw movement. A shadow slipped from the command hut and headed toward the stables, careful and controlled. I stopped, watching as the figure paused, scanning the yard before ducking inside. My pulse picked up. Was it nothing, a routine task after dark, or something that didn't want to be seen? I hesitated. Should I report it to Nolan immediately, or was I letting fear turn shadows into threats? Before I could decide, the stable door opened again. The figure emerged, leading a saddled horse. Light from a nearby window caught his face. Rafe, the Alpha I had treated earlier. His ribs were injured, and riding should have been agony, possibly impossible. As he guided the horse toward a narrow side gate, my choice was made. Keeping to the darkness, I followed. My steps were silent in the fresh snow, my breath shallow. The game had started sooner than I expected, and the cost already felt too high. Somewhere far away, a prince held a wooden wolf and counted the days. I pressed myself against the rough wall of the stables when Rafe paused and glanced back. My heart slammed hard enough to hurt. Had he sensed me? My scent was faint, always had been, and the wind carried it away from him. Still, seasoned warriors learned to feel eyes on their backs, seconds stretched tight. Then he turned away and led the horse through the gate and into the tree line. I waited until the forest swallowed him whole. Following him directly would be foolish. I wasn't a tracker, and the woods at night were unforgiving, even to wolves who knew them well. Instead, I slipped inside the stables. Warm air wrapped around me, thick with hay and horse sweat. A dozen large bodies shifted softly in their stalls, breathing slowly and calmly. The steady sounds grounded me as I moved carefully between them. I stopped at Rafe's empty stall. If he was writing out secretly, something here might explain why. A small lantern hung nearby. I lit it just enough to see and scan the space. No extra saddlebags, no supplies laid out, nothing obvious. Then I knelt and brushed my fingers through the straw. They closed around something small and hard. I lifted it into the dim light. A carved wooden token, rough edges, strange markings, 3 deep slashes crossed by a single diagonal line. I'd never seen the symbol before. My stomach tightened. I slipped the token into my pocket, snuffed the lantern, and left the stables quietly. One ride and one symbol weren't proof. Not yet. Nolan would need facts, not guesses. Back in the healing hut, the air smelled of herbs and clean linen. Devon's fever had broken. His breathing was easy now, his face no longer twisted in pain. Relief loosened something in my chest. Morris was awake nearby, watching me as I prepared fresh paste for Devon's wound. "Late rounds?" he asked casually, but his eyes missed nothing. I nodded, keeping my focus steady. "Infection doesn't wait. I saw you speaking with the captain earlier," Morris said. "He can be sharp at first, but Nolan's fair, one of the best leaders I've served under." I hummed in response, unsure whether this was idle talk or quiet testing. Morris had been here longer than most. He'd know the rhythms of the outpost, the habits, the cracks. "How long have you been stationed here?" I asked, changing the bandage with careful hands. "3 winters now," he replied. "Longer than most. Young wolves get restless out here. They'd rather rotate back closer to the heartlands where the fights are fewer and the pleasures are better." He grinned, then hissed softly as the movement tugged at the cut on his cheek. I smiled faintly, but inside my thoughts were already elsewhere. Watching, listening, waiting. Rafe had an edge on him. I could feel it even before Morris laughed and said it out loud. "Pure alpha energy," Morris said with a grin. "Ambitious, too. He volunteered for border duty just to get noticed. I want a spot in the inner guard one day. Ambition." The word stuck with me. I'd seen what hunger like that could become, devotion or disaster. "And do you think he'll get it?" I asked, keeping my voice light. The beta rolled one shoulder. "He's dangerous in a fight, no doubt, but patience isn't his strength. He collects enemies as fast as allies." I finished treating Devon and stepped over to Morris, carefully checking the bandage wrapped around his wrist. "Any enemies in particular?" Something in my tone must have shifted. Morris's easy expression vanished, his eyes sharpening as he studied me. "Why the sudden interest in Rafe Omega?" I forced my face into calm neutrality. "He was my first patient here. I like to know the people I'm healing." He watched me for a heartbeat longer, then relaxed. "Fair enough, he and Captain Nolan clash, mostly over tactics. Rafe pushes for aggressive patrols deeper into neutral land. Nolan prefers holding the line." The words settled in my mind like scattered bones, not yet a skeleton, but close. If Rafe hated restraint, would he act alone? Or worse, seek help beyond the pack? "Rest now," I told Morris softly, finishing my work. "The herbs will dull the pain." Later, curled on the narrow cot in the corner of the healing hut, sleep refused to come. The wooden token pressed against my thigh through my pocket, a silent reminder of the risk I was taking. Every time I shifted, I felt it, solid, real, dangerous. My thoughts drifted to Prince Leo. To the silver button he'd given me, heavy with promise, 5 days. Just 5 more days until I saw him again if I survived the tightening web around this outpost. The next 4 days blurred together. I cleaned wounds, crushed herbs, and stitched skin, and I listened. No one paid attention to an Omega healer. Warriors spoke freely around me about patrol routes, grudges, and command decisions. Captain Nolan had been right, I was invisible. Rafe returned before dawn the morning after his strange ride. He slipped in through a side gate like a ghost, as if he'd never left at all. No one challenged him, no one asked questions. He didn't come to me for treatment either, as if his injuries mattered less than whatever pulled him into the night. Then I saw it again, and again, not only Rafe, 2 others, Canna and Jard, they didn't leave together. They spaced their exits carefully, hours apart, moving low and quiet, skirting guard paths with practiced ease. On the 4th night, I finally found Captain Nolan alone in the command hut. Most of the outpost slept. Maps were spread across his table, lit by a single lantern. "You have something to report," he said without looking up. I placed the wooden token on the table between us. "I found this in the stable 4 nights ago after Rafe took a horse. He's gone out twice since. Canna and Jard too." Nolan picked up the token. The moment he saw the carved symbol, his face hardened. "Exactly where did you find this?" he asked. "In the straw of Rafe's stall." His jaw tightened. "This mark belongs to the Shadowclaw pack. They were cast out 2 years ago for blood rituals. The survivors became rogues." A cold slid down my spine. You think Rafe is working with them? I think this is serious, Nolan said carefully, but not proof. We need to know where they meet, what they're trading, information, territory, blood. I leave for the pack house tomorrow, I said quietly. Alpha's orders, Nolan nodded. You'll tell Alpha Darius everything, the token, the night rides, the names. And if I'm wrong, my voice barely held steady, his gaze locked onto mine, hard, unyielding. Then Rafe will explain himself to the Alpha. The weight of it pressed into my chest. Accusations could destroy lives, silence could destroy the pack. What if he leaves again tonight? I asked. I'll have him watched, Nolan said. Your role ends here, you've done well. I should have felt relieved. Instead, unease followed me out of the hut, clinging like fog. Too many questions unanswered. Too many shadows are still moving, but my time here was over. Tomorrow I will return to the pack house, back to Prince Leo. Back to the wooden wolf and whatever fate it was leading me toward. The trip back to Central Pack lands passed without trouble, though my body never fully relaxed. Tension sat heavily on my shoulders the entire long walk. Ellis, the beta assigned to escort me, barely spoke a word. His silence wasn't cold, it was practiced, disciplined. I didn't mind it. The quiet gave me space to sort through everything waiting for me, the warning I had to give Alpha Darius and the boy I needed to see again. Snow began to fall as the sun dipped low, pale flakes drifting into my hair and clinging to my lashes. When the pack settlement came into view, something about it felt off. Smaller, tighter, like the walls had crept closer while I was gone. A week at the border, surrounded by endless trees and open sky, had changed how I saw everything. Ellis didn't take me to my cabin, he led me straight to the pack house. That alone told me the Alpha was waiting. Servants slowed as we passed, their eyes following me with open curiosity. The halls felt too familiar, their turns etched into my bones. The door to the Alpha's study stood open. Darius was inside, standing near the window, his broad shape cut dark against the dull winter light. Leave us, he said without turning. Ellis bowed and slipped out, closing the door behind him. The sound echoed louder than it should have. I stood still, hands folded, waiting. The room was thick with his presence. His scent pressed into me, powerful, commanding, meant to bend others without effort. My instincts screamed to lower my head, to shrink, to submit. My knees trembled. I kept my spine straight, just like my grandmother taught me. My son asked for you every day, Darius said at last, turning to face me. His eyes searched my face, sharp and unreadable. How is he? I asked, the words slipping out before caution could stop them. I didn't care about protocol at that moment. Surprise flashed across his features, just for a breath. He's better, he said. He slept through the night, no screaming. His tutors say he's been paying attention again. The relief hit me harder than I expected. It spread through my chest, warm and steady. I'm glad, I said quietly. Darius moved behind his desk. Captain Nolan sent word ahead of you. He mentioned a token, Shadowclaw. I reached into my pocket and placed the wooden disc on the desk. Yes, Alpha, I found it in the stable. Rafe was leaving the outpost at night. After that, Canna and Jard began doing the same. Darius picked up the token. His grip tightened, the wood creaking softly beneath his fingers. Anger rolled off him, sharp and controlled. Shadowclaw should have died when the group fell apart, he said. If they're working with traitors inside my pack, there could be another explanation, I said, even though doubt gnawed at me. His gaze snapped to mine. You defend them? I defend the truth, I replied, nothing else. The silence that followed stretched thin. I knew I'd stepped too far, I braced for it. Instead, something unexpected happened. The corner of Darius's mouth lifted, barely there, but real. Nolan was right about you, he said. You see past rank, past habit. Before I could answer, the door slammed open. Leo stood in the doorway, breathing hard, his small hands clenched at his sides like he'd run the entire way, his eyes locked onto me. You came back, he said, my chest tightened. I smiled before I could stop myself. I said I would. He walked toward me, slow and careful, like he was afraid I might disappear if he moved too fast. When he reached me, he pulled something from his pocket. My wooden wolf, it stopped the bad dreams, he said, holding it out. I dropped to my knees instead of taking it. Then you should keep it, I said softly, at least a little longer. His eyes went wide. Really? I nodded, really. Something shifted in his face. His shoulders relaxed. Trust, fragile and terrifying, settled in his gaze. I showed Eben, he said. He said it was made with love. Eben, I looked up at Darius, he noticed. My advisor, he said. He helped Leo while you were gone. I remembered the man's sharp eyes, the way he'd watched me too closely before. A quiet warning stirred in my gut, though I couldn't name it. Mom, Leo whispered. The word hit me like a blow. Leo, Darius snapped. It's okay, I said quickly, keeping my eyes on the boy. Leo, I'm not your mother, you know that. He nodded, his face was serious, steady. But you came back, he said. You promised and you came back. That was all, and it meant everything. I had done what his mother never did. I kept my word. I came back when I said I would. Yes, I said softly, I came back. Something sharp flickered in Alpha Darius's eyes, pain, recognition, maybe even gratitude. He turned his head slightly and cleared his throat as if steadying himself. Leo needs to rest after his journey, he said. She'll join us for the evening meal. The prince tightened his grip on the small wooden wolf in his hands. He looked up at me with wide, hopeful eyes. Promise, I said without hesitation. The weight of his trust settled heavily on my chest. It was precious and terrifying. I knew how easily a child could be hurt again if fate tore me from his life. Leo seemed satisfied. He gave me one last long look before allowing the waiting attendant to guide him out of the study. The door closed with a soft click. Darius let out a slow breath. He called you Mom, he said quietly. The words carried too many emotions to name. He's looking for connection, I replied carefully, for someone who won't leave him. The Alpha turned toward me, his gaze suddenly sharp and searching. And will you leave him, Omega? His voice dropped. Ara, when your border duty ends, when your usefulness as my eyes and ears is over, what then? The question struck deep, too deep. What place could I ever hold in Prince Leo's future? I was an orphaned Omega healer. I had no claim to royalty, no right to grow attached to the Alpha's son. I don't know what the future holds, I said honestly, but I won't disappear without explanation. I won't leave him wondering what he did wrong or why he wasn't enough. Something in my words cracked through Darius's rigid control. For a brief moment, I saw past the Alpha, past the authority he wore like armor. I saw a wounded man, a wary one. A father scarred by the same abandonment that haunted his son. Her name was Serena, he said suddenly. Leo's mother. His gaze drifted unfocused. She was brilliant, beautiful, strong-willed. I thought her strength would make her a perfect Luna. His jaw tightened. I didn't understand that the same strength would make her feel trapped. I stayed silent. He wasn't speaking to me anymore. She left a letter, he continued, his voice hardening. Said she couldn't breathe inside the pack walls, the rules, the duties, the hierarchy. His lips pressed into a thin line. She said she needed freedom more than she needed her own child. The bitterness cut deep. I thought of Leo's small hands clutching that wooden wolf, believing his mother's absence was his fault. Children blame themselves, I said quietly. Even when they're told not to. Darius's eyes snapped back to me. Yes, as I'm sure you did when your parents died. The words hit too close, too accurate. My grandmother helped me understand it wasn't my fault, I said after a moment, and when she died too. He asked gently. There was no cruelty in his tone, only understanding. No one, I said. I helped myself, he nodded slowly. And now you help my son. He turned to the window, watching snow drift down in slow, silent sheets. You'll return to the border outpost tomorrow. Continue your observations, but you'll come to the pack house once a week to check on Leo. It was an order dressed up as concern. I didn't argue. Truthfully, the idea of seeing Leo again eased a tension I hadn't admitted to myself. Yes, Alpha, I said, lowering my head. As for the potential traitors, Darius added, his voice cooling into authority, I'll handle it personally. Speak of your suspicions to no one, not even Captain Nalan. Your visits here are for my son, nothing more. The shift caught me off guard. You don't trust Nalan? I trust very few, he replied flatly. A habit of leadership, when you may understand someday. Before I could respond, a knock sounded at the door. The advisor I'd seen before entered, the one Leo had called Eben. He moved with easy confidence, clearly at home in the Alpha's presence. His sharp eyes flicked over me, calculating. Alpha, he said smoothly. The messengers from the Northern Coalition have arrived. Then he turned to me with a thin smile. Ah, the Omega healer returns. Prince Leo will be pleased. Something in his tone made my skin prickle, though his words were polite. I gave a respectful nod and said nothing. Ara will join us for the evening meal, Darius said. Prepare quarters for her overnight stay. Of course, Alpha, Eben replied. His smile never reached his eyes. I'll see to it immediately. As he turned to leave, the unease in my chest deepened. The pack house felt warmer than before, but the danger lurking beneath its walls felt closer too. As he turned away, something caught my eye, just a sliver of wood showing from his pocket. Small, carved. My chest tightened instantly. It was the same kind of token I had found in Rafe's stall. For half a heartbeat, I lost control of my face. That was all it took. Eben noticed. His sharp eyes narrowed, then slid down to the desk where the Shadowclaw token lay uncovered. The air between us shifted. In that single glance, everything clicked. He knew, and he knew that I knew. Alpha, I started to say. I never finished. Eben moved faster than I thought possible for a man his age. He backed toward the door and raised his voice in a shout that cut through the room like a blade. Guards, the Omega is a traitor, a Shadowclaw spy. The words hit like a blow. Darius turned on him, fury flashing across his face. What madness are you speaking of, Eben? She bears their mark, Eben snapped, pointing straight at the token. Ask her where she really got it, not from some border warrior, but from the ones who control her. The accusation was absurd, laughable even, but no one was laughing. Not here, not with lives hanging in the balance with every word. I didn't step back, I didn't look away. I found the token exactly where I said I did, I replied, keeping my voice steady even as my pulse thundered. But it seems I'm not the only one who recognizes Shadowclaw symbols. I lifted my chin. Your advisor carries the same mark right now in his pocket. The room went still. Darius slowly turned to Eben, the color drained from the older man's face. Is this true? Eben's expression twisted, his eyes burning with open hatred as he looked at me. This Omega witch has poisoned your son's mind, he hissed. Now she seeks to turn you against your most loyal servant. Search her things, you'll find proof. No, I said quietly, search for him. I met Darius's gaze. The token is in his right pocket. Time stretched painfully thin as the alpha looked between us, weighing truth and lies. Then at last he moved. Empty your pockets, Eben. A slow, dangerous smile crept across the advisor's face. Of course, my alpha. His hand slipped into his pocket, but instead of wood, he pulled out silver. A small whistle. Before anyone could stop him, he raised it to his lips and blew. There was no sound, nothing my ears could catch, but the reaction was instant. Shouts exploded from outside. Steel clashed, the sharp cry of battle filled the air, an attack perfectly timed. Eben straightened, dropping every trace of false loyalty. You see, Darius, some of us grew tired of waiting. The northern lands, the eastern forests, all wasted under your timid rule. Darius lunged. Eben twisted aside with shocking speed, a hidden dagger flashing into his hand. Shadowclaw promises more, he said coldly. By morning they'll have a new alpha, one who takes what is owed. The truth slammed into me all at once. The border raids, the leaked information, Rafe. The secret meetings in the dark. It had all been Eben using angry, desperate warriors to build his coup. The pack house erupted into chaos as the gates were breached. Through the window I saw Shadowclaw fighters flooding the grounds, colliding with loyal wolves in brutal combat. Blood, screams, smoke. Leo, the thought hit me like ice. Without thinking, I ran. I didn't look back as Darius tackled Eben to the floor. I didn't stop for the sounds of rage behind me. The halls were a war zone. I pressed myself against walls, slipped behind shattered furniture, moving quietly, using every ounce of my Omega instinct to stay unseen. The air reeked of blood and fear. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I reached Leo's door and found one warrior standing guard. He was bleeding, barely upright, but he hadn't moved. The prince, I gasped. Is he safe? He nodded once, barricaded, just like the alpha ordered. Please, I said, he trusts me. After a long second, the warrior stepped aside. I slipped inside and whispered, Leo. Ella. His voice came from the bathroom, thin and shaking. I found him curled in the tub, clutching his wooden wolf like it was the only solid thing left in the world. When he saw me, his eyes filled with tears, relief breaking through the fear. They came back, he whispered. The bad men? Like before, I asked, wrapping him in my arms. He nodded against my chest. When Mother left, there was fighting then too. Eben said she ran because she was scared, but I heard her yelling at him. He was angry. About the northern packs. The last piece fell into place, heavy and sickening. Had Serena uncovered Eben's plans years ago? Had she tried to stop him? Had she fled or been silenced? I pushed the thoughts aside and held Leo tighter. We're going somewhere safer, I said softly. I promise, and this time I meant it with everything I had. Can you do two things for me? I whispered. Be very brave and very quiet. Leo nodded at once, his small jaw tightened, his fear locking into something sharper, focus, purpose. He reminded me of a young wolf stalking prey. Yes, he breathed. We slipped out of his chamber together, the injured guard shadowing us as we moved deeper into the pack house. Every hallway felt more dangerous than the last. The sounds of battle had grown wild, snarls ripping through the air, bones cracking, half-shifted wolves losing themselves to instinct. The walls seemed to tremble with it. This way, the guard muttered, pointing to a plain section of stone that looked no different from the rest. The old tunnels. They lead to the ceremonial caves. No one will look for him there. I didn't question it. He pressed something hidden in the wall, and the stone slid open with a low grind, revealing a narrow passage beyond. Cold air rushed out, heavy with earth and something ancient. Leo squeezed my hand as we stepped inside. His fear was gone now, replaced by a fierce calm that made my chest ache. It was the same look his father wore before battle. The tunnel was tight and dark. The ground smelled damp, layered with old magic, rituals stacked on rituals, memories soaked into stone by generations of alphas and lunas. We moved fast but silently, careful with every step. Behind us, the sounds of fighting slowly faded. My mom showed me these once, Leo whispered. She said they're older than the pack. I almost stumbled. What kind of Luna teaches secret escape paths to a child so young? One who feared he might need them. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern glowing with soft blue light. Strange fungi clung to the walls, casting shadows that danced across ancient stone. Symbols were carved everywhere, some familiar from pack history, others so old I couldn't even guess their meaning. We'll be safe here, the guard said. Blood soaked through his clothes as he spoke. I guided him down against the wall and knelt beside him. The wound in his side was deep, ugly, and still bleeding fast. "Leo," I said gently, forcing calm into my voice. "I need to help him. Can you look around for plants? Glowing caves usually hide useful things." It worked, his eyes lit with purpose. "I'll help," he said, already moving. I tore strips from my undershirt and pressed them against the guard's wound, trying to slow the blood. "The Alpha?" he asked weakly. "Fighting Eben when I left," I said. Darius had control of the fight. Relief flickered across the guard's face. "Good, I knew it was him. Too many accidents, too many lies." Leo's voice rang out bright and proud. "Ara, I found some." I looked up. He was pointing near an underground spring where thick, fuzzy moss clung to the rocks. My breath caught, the coagulant kind. "Rare, powerful, perfect," I said. "Bring it here." As Leo gathered the moss carefully, the light in the cavern shifted. A shadow stretched across the entrance. I stood instantly, turning my body so I was between Leo and the threat. Eben stepped into the glow, torn and bloodied, eyes burning with madness. "How sweet," he sneered. "The Omega playing hero, protecting the pup." The guard tried to rise and failed, collapsing with a groan that left only me. "It's over," I said, lifting my chin even as fear clawed at my ribs. "The Alpha knows everything, Shadowclaw, your betrayal, even what you did to Serena." His face twisted with rage. "That woman should have stayed silent. She learned too much, threatened everything." He smiled then, cold, cruel. "Removing her was easy, a broken mate, a traumatized child, the perfect cover." Behind me, Leo made a small, broken sound. I reached back without looking and grabbed his hand, squeezing hard. "And now," Eben said, raising his blood-slick dagger, "you'll join her." Another tragic loss. Time slowed. I had nothing, no blade, no shield, just my body and my will. And in that moment, something inside me hardened. I had spent my life staying small. Quiet, unseen, not anymore. For Leo, I would be anything, shield, weapon, monster if needed. Eben lunged. The cavern exploded with a roar so powerful it shook stone from the ceiling. A massive black wolf burst from the tunnel, slamming into Eben with crushing force. Bone met bone, flesh tore. The Alpha's fury filled the space like a storm. Darius. The fight was brutal and short. Eben never stood a chance. When it was over, Darius shifted back, breath ragged, eyes searching the cavern. "Leo," he said hoarsely. "Are you hurt?" Leo shook his head, still holding my hand. "Ara protected me," he said softly, "like Mom would have." Something broke and healed at the same time in Darius's expression. Grief, understanding, acceptance. And the bond between us settled into place, quiet and unshakable like stone beneath the earth. He looked at me then, blood streaking his skin, shoulders still squared, his body instinctively blocking his son even though the danger had already passed. He hadn't relaxed for a second. "Yes," he said quietly, voice rough. "She did." 3 months later, I stood at the edge of the training grounds, the cool morning air carrying the sharp scent of dirt and steel. Leo was in front of his father, small fists clenched, brow furrowed in fierce focus as he worked through the basic defensive moves Darius showed him. His movements weren't perfect, but his determination was unshakable. Every stumble ended with him pushing himself upright again. The Shadowclaw attack had changed everything. The traitors hiding at the border outpost were exposed and punished. The pack breathed easier once they were gone. Captain Nolan's loyalty had earned him a new rank, Beta Commander, and the shift in leadership had settled like a firm foundation beneath us all. And I had been given a choice. "He needs you," Darius had told me, his gaze steady, honest. "We both do." So I stayed, not as a visitor passing through, not as someone waiting to leave. I stayed as the pack's official healer, tending claws, bones, and scars. And unofficially, I became something else entirely, the quiet guardian of a young prince who still clutched the wooden wolf carving I'd given him. A boy who sometimes whispered "Mom" in his sleep when nightmares tore him awake, his small body shaking as if the past still hunted him. The silver button Leo had pressed into my hand that night now rested against my chest, tied to a leather cord. It was a promise. A reminder that I had chosen this life and it had chosen me back. As I watched father and son move together across the training field, steps matching, breath steady, I felt something inside me stretch open. Something I thought had withered away long ago. Belonging, purpose, home. I was Serena. I never would be. I could never take her place in Leo's heart. But I could give him something different, something solid. I could stay. I could protect myself. I could heal wounds no one else saw and refuse to leave when things became painful or messy or hard. And in return, this wounded alpha child and his guarded, battle-scarred father had given me the one thing I'd convinced myself I'd never have again. A family. Leo glanced up and spotted me watching. His serious concentration shattered instantly, replaced by a bright, unguarded smile that lit his entire face. He waved with wild enthusiasm, nearly forgetting his stance. After a brief pause, Darius turned as well. His gesture was smaller, restrained, but real. I lifted my hand back, my chest tightening as I felt the full weight of their trust. Their need, their growing affection. The wooden wolf that once comforted me through lonely nights now stood guard over a young prince's dreams. The orphaned Omega who had learned to disappear had stepped fully into the light, finally seen, finally valued. Sometimes the most broken souls are the ones who need healing the most. And sometimes, in choosing to heal others, we find the missing pieces of ourselves.